Hello everybody! This is a video about some of the things you may want to consider if you're starting out putting together an emergency go bag. I am an urban planning graduate student, currently studying community resilience to disaster events, and so this is one potential way for people to work on maybe becoming a little bit more resilient. So I'm going to explain what I keep in my everyday starter go bag and why, hopefully to make the topic more approachable to people who look at the big long lists you can look up in a lot of places and go, wow, so much of this is either not relevant or not realistic for me. To start off, I do want to say this isn't remotely intended to be like the whole 2 weeks of supplies to have on hand in your house for major earthquake kind of kit. This is a small, very portable collection of essentials that I find practical to carry around with me on a daily basis. It's intended for a context where I'm spending most of my time at work or school, like several miles away, often across the river from my house. One of the biggest considerations I'm working from is, will I actually be willing to carry all this stuff around with me regularly? Okay, because a more pared down kit that I actually have on me if an emergency happens is going to be a lot more useful than a more complete kit that I've left at home that day because I've gotten sick of dragging around a ton of stuff I never use just in case. So I think it's really important to prioritize meeting people where they're at and making the most of the behavioral real estate you can feasibly expect to work with. Okay, so first off, water and food. I have a reusable water bottle that I carry around with me all over the place, and the nice thing about it is I'm actually using it and refilling it throughout the day. So it feels worth carrying around even though obviously liquids are relatively heavy substances. Yeah, don't recommend getting dehydrated, so don't do that. For food, honestly, what I just keep on me is it's just a couple protein bars because of the effort to reward ratio. They are also physically lightweight and easy to just replace at the grocery store if one day I decide I really need a snack right that minute and I didn't have anything else on hand. It's not a meal, it's not really intended to replace a meal, but it's something that, like, along with water, is going to make sure I'm going to be able to physically get somewhere that would have the space and resources to provide more substantial food. It's always something that works for me because it doesn't conflict with any of my personal dietary restrictions. I don't have to look out for wheat or nuts or soy or dairy. If I did my calculus, there might look different. Same way someone else might instead pick an option that I don't pack, like meat jerky or something like that. Next up on the topic of basic body maintenance, I want to make sure I'm also carrying around a small supply of my prescription medications as well as some OTC painkillers. All of my pills look sufficiently different that I just toss them into a single leftover bottle for efficiency's sake, honestly. Obviously, your mileage might vary there. Over-the-counter stuff especially, I feel like it's really easy to start overwhelming yourself with what-if situations and thinking about what to include. So my rule for cutting through that was, like, what do I actually use regularly in real life? I could include more for specialized circumstances, but that gets back into the issue of how willing I am to schlep things around all the time without having a reasonably common use case. My approach is also very, very tailored to my circumstances, which are just garden variety pills, not any liquids or anything that needs refrigeration or injected or whatnot like that. On a similar theme, I've also got a few other simple health-related items, some band-aids, a few sterile gauze pads, antiseptic ointment, and hand sanitizer. I keep a KN95 respirator mask on hand too because those come in really handy when there's air quality issues, like with wildfire smoke or potential environmental pollutants. I do also have a list of what my prescription medications are in my bag because even if the circumstances where that would be useful are a little more limited, it's also not a remotely difficult thing to keep on hand. Certainly nicer to have a backup copy of that information that isn't reliant on anything electronic. On the same piece of paper, especially since there's a decent amount of circumstantial usefulness overlap, I have a list of emergency contacts, phone numbers, emails, and their location and relationship to me. Because, especially if I'm not available to be contacting people, I'd very much like someone to get ahead of my most important out-of-state relationships, but also not be texting them thinking they live 15 minutes away and can come quickly help out with something local. The next batch of items that I keep in my bag are a set of basic bicycle repair tools. My vehicle for getting around outside of public transit is my bike, and so especially if this kit is supposed to make sure I can get baseline from place to place, ideally back to my house, to a wider variety of supplies if that's possible and safe. I need to make sure that I can keep my bike functioning.
So what that includes, I have a multi-tool with a bunch of different screwdriver heads and so on, a couple of zip ties for reattaching cords if I have to cut off the existing ties, and also supplies for changing and repairing a flat tire. That includes a patch kit, a pair of tire levers, and a mechanical hand pump. These, again, are all very portable and lightweight items and fairly inexpensive, with a lot of bang for the buck in the case that I did need them in a disaster scenario, or, even just in a run-of-the-mill bike snafu while I'm commuting home. Incidentally, I make a point to have these around partially because I do have a decent rudimentary sense of how to do a bit of bike maintenance. If I wasn't comfortable tinkering around a little, I might not prioritize having them as much because, again, there's not a lot of point carrying around things you can't actually use. I do also at this point really want to express how much my design of this kit as a whole is influenced by the fact that my personal vehicle is a bike. I emphasize the piece of am I willing to carry this around all day every day a lot, and that's a general idea that I think is applicable to everybody, but the specific formulation of it for me is very literal, because carrying something around with me whenever I'm out of the house for a while does not mean having it tossed somewhere in the trunk of a car. That's why size and space and weight are big influencing factors for me. I'm not going to include so many things that I need to put it all in a separate bag from my existing work and school supplies. The last major thing for me is a way to make sure that I can keep my phone charged. Obviously, depending on the state of things like cell networks and Wi-Fi, that's gonna be important for communication and being able to look up or keep on top of situation-specific news and alerts. But even if those things aren't available, at baseline it's got a built-in flashlight, some city maps that I've downloaded for offline access, and I could potentially add other information to it like first aid infographics, reminder maps of existing emergency support infrastructure in the area, that kind of thing. So that's a lot of things I can keep access to in a very compact form that I already carry around with me. And while I do normally keep my phone pretty well charged anyway, I also have a solar charger pad for a bit of extra insurance and flexibility. I specifically picked that over a battery backup per se because even though the solar charger is a bit bigger, what it does is provide a solution if the electric grid is down that I can immediately use as much as needed without having to remember to keep it charged ahead of time. Solar chargers obviously vary in usability with the weather, and they're not going to charge as fast as some of your other options, but that particularly efficiency versus maintenance needs trade-off, that's what works best for me personally. There's also cost to consider. You can get solar chargers and battery backups, each at a variety of different price points depending on the quality you want to invest in. The one that I have is a pretty well reviewed mid-range option I got for $50-ish a few years ago. So yeah, that's what I keep on hand as a super portable basic necessities go bag in the context of living in an urban area without a car. Everything here basically just lives in my regular backpack that I use for commuting. A lot of them are multi-purpose, useful in an everyday context too, which makes them more appealing to keep on hand than a bunch of highly specific emergency gear. Because basically the overall goal I'm designing for is to have the essentials to make sure I can get back to somewhere that's better suited for having more supplies, whether that's my house or an emergency resource hub. I hope this has been helpful for laying out some kinds of things you can think about for doing a little bit of personal disaster preparedness, especially if the super comprehensive guides with tons and tons of things to prepare for come across as super daunting, because they do for me. I also hope I've made it clear that this all is what makes sense for the way my own life looks right now. It's not a checklist that's supposed to work the same way for everyone. The main thing is thinking critically about what you specifically want to prepare for and how to make it practical and feasible so you'll actually be able to do it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful.